So there's some, I think, confusion around the paradox of Elon Musk. How can one man be so polarizing to almost everybody in some way? You'll see the outrage from leftists firebombing and terrorizing his businesses. You'll see the disownership and disassociation to him from almost every other group in certain ways, whether it's through his business reasoning or through his politics or through his just weird behaviors. But at the same time, he centralizes himself in basically what is a way that makes him the, I would say, center of the social universe to a large degree. He's been able to command and encircle us with himself in a way that's very similar to how Donald Trump was able to do it. He obviously being involved with politics, and Elon Musk much more around technology and business. But this leads us to an interesting discussion around the Faustian principles of Elon Musk. What is it about this guy specifically where his shade basically casts a pall on us that reminds us of someone like Cecil Rhodes, but at the same time having and witnessing the interactions of him into X in interviews, any kind of media where he's able to be himself or displays his own characteristics, he can come across as very awkward and cringy and almost an embarrassment to what his vision and mission is. And yet he still has staunch advocates and friends who will say that behind closed doors or this and that, he's this type of person and salt of the earth, etc. So why is it such a polarizing figure? Why is he such a polarizing figure? It's hard to understand unless you know a lot about first Elon himself, obviously, and there's a few biographies you can read if you're interested in that sort of stuff. I don't necessarily recommend modern biographies for several reasons, but in general you can find a plethora and a surfeit of information on Elon. He's probably one of the most talked about people in the world, obviously first because of his technological aspirations, secondly his wealth, and then now thirdly his association to Donald Trump. So in doing all of this preamble, I will work you into first a very short and summarized version of his backstory. He's basically a South African extract, and he's an Anglo-South African. So in South Africa you have two types of white people. You have Dutch, who call themselves Boers, and then you have Anglos, who are white settlers from typically the Commonwealth, UK. And now his father was something of a outlandish figure in South Africa, and had several ventures and other misgivings. But in general, Elon moved out of South Africa when he was young, obviously having no affection for the place, given his temperament obviously was not suited to being in South Africa. If you don't know, is very big on, say, sports and guns, and they're a little bit like the Texas of Africa, if you could put it that way. So his current station was built up from, you could say, a suffering or an adversity in his youth, and having that issue about being bullied and beaten and things like this has instilled in him some values which are core tenets now to his lived life. But after that period, he moved to, I think, Canada first through his mother's lineage, and then off to, maybe it's here, but I think Penn State, University of Pennsylvania, one of those two, to study economics and physics, and then he went to California, whether he did a PhD or attempted to start a PhD at Stanford, but ended up starting a company called Zip2, which was just some general software, which I think that one did maps, and then he started an X company which did payments, which merged with PayPal, Peter Thiel and some other chaps, and the PayPal Mafia, what they call them, ended up being this whole thing. And then after he used the money from the exit of PayPal to eBay, started, I want to say SpaceX, and then concomitant to that, he bought out the founders of Tesla and basically owned what was the pre-prototype Tesla. So you can almost call him the founder of Tesla. I think traditionally people don't say that because you're not there at the start, but it's much more around what do you call founding something which didn't have a product and then had a product? So maybe you can call him a founder. And this is basically where his entrepreneurial journey started in the limelight. People started to know who he was because he was now the owner of America's next technology car company. And this is a pivotal thing because most car companies in America were very old and established well before Elon was even born, and particularly if you think of things like Ford and General Motors. So the reminiscence of, say, even Henry Ford was obviously very stark and glaring when you saw there's a very entrepreneurial man here who has a taste for the ability of technology to be unleashed, and that's in that way that I've discussed it previously, but the infinitely scalable version of technology. How can I make everything more efficient and better and cheaper, and more people will buy it? And this is how it's basically started what is his basic philosophy of business, which is that the overlap of commercialization of technology is an easy problem to solve once you have a, say, capital base, and then you know the right engineers, the right minds, and how to attract them. Can you cement and provide the cynosure for a cabal of engineers? It's like, here's some problem we need solved, and you bring in very smart people and they'll solve it for you. You then can take the problem that you've now solved and commercialize it with a bunch of different people who are very good at commercialization. And you can see how him being the interlinkage between these two things has borne out several very, very successful companies, two of which, Tesla and SpaceX, make him the, if not the world's richest man, one of the world's richest men. And this is in contrast to other very rich people, where we see with someone like Warren Buffett, who's rich because he just buys companies and then reinvests capital, a very finance-orientated mindset. And then someone like Bernie Arnold, who owns LMVH, I think, where it's just a bunch of luxury goods. So in the Faustian sense, I think obviously we were big on finance when Warren Buffett probably was the peak of his notoriety in the 80s, 90s, but now the technology's surpassed and circumvented you could say, altar place for finance. Is to say we now are a technology first society, culture, and we appreciate technology more than we appreciate finance at this point, and for good reasons. I think it's more beneficial holistically, spiritually, but also in general. It's able to scale wealth much faster for more people, whereas finance is much more stringent and confined to certain requirements around deployment of capital and the nature of usury and other, fungible goods. And so here I think it's important to understand that Elon has certain insights which many people know, but he applies them because he's got this indefatigable will to do these things. And this is that will to power. He's unleashed what is his will to power. Now, I think he claims he has Asperger's, but I'm not sure. I mean, maybe he's on some spectrum somewhere, where you'll find a lot of people are there anyway, which, and for all intents and purposes, they're normal. I think he's actually just a bit of a goofy nerd, and maybe Asperger's is a cover for just sometimes being exceptionally cringy and not understanding social mores. This is the case, and you could say the opposite case, for some people who are exceptionally talented at understanding social situations, but have no grasp of the application of themselves into something like business, commerce, technology, invention. So I just think he's on some, and you can call it a social spectrum rather than the autism spectrum, where he's just not as capable and being, say, charming and witty and I'd say ingratiating himself to most people, because being likable is still a skill, but it's also something innate. It's what you're born with. Do people find you charming and funny and handsome? Usually that's something genetic to a large degree. Maybe there's a little bit of practice, but you'll see with the pickup artist crew and all of these manosphere guys, where the necessary practice of things and abstracting away and purity of certain angles to how do I pick up women, how do I become charming, how do I make people like me, Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people. These are very artificial ways of trying to engineer outcomes rather than just embracing something more like who you are is maybe best left alone, and then you just try to embellish or soften certain parts in certain ways and in certain circumstances. But nevertheless, so Elon here is just a bit of a cringe lord, and we try to not hold that too much against him, because his commercial and his, you could say, life form, when I say the measured success, this is when you talk about success, it's obviously relative, but are related to a criteria of what we define as success. And so someone would say he is successful or not successful, and you'll have some, I don't know, insufferable Buddhists say he's not successful because I define success as the peace and atonement of myself towards nirvana. But in general, I think we all collectively agree he's a very successful man, and he has billions of dollars, which is a quantitative metric how we measure success to a degree for a lot of people. Obviously, inherited money is not a necessary contingent requirement for that. So there are clauses and caveats around how money is measured or measures you and your reflection there. But I think we can definitely taste that piratical Viking spirit in him. He seeks to deploy his forces, his troops, his money, whatever it is, in ways that enables him to defeat and conquer other spheres, other realms, and that includes the realms of technology, in which he's fascinated with. Since his founding of Tesla, and SpaceX, he went on to found Solar City, so renewable energy through solar panels. He was the founding member of OpenAI, obviously now one of the leading AI platforms globally. He has some Hyperloop connections, which is just a system of a magnetic train in a vacuum. And then there's these other companies, Neuralink and a Boring company. One is brain implants with chips, and the other one is tunnels. And beyond that, I think he's probably also got certain ventures, and I think his brother also does something like urban agriculture or something a bit silly. And you can see, so, I mean, obviously there's a certain nature to their family that they are entrepreneurial, they have the Viking spirit, but the channeling effect, and I think the valence here of Elon himself genetically and then socially has allowed for a very unique person, unique outcome. Now, what does all of this mean? Like, why am I giving you this backstory? Well, it's important to understand, and how do we place Elon as a Faustian man? Because, as I said before, he's very polarizing. People like to denigrate him and disparage him because he is very cringy. If you are on a certain, say, right spectrum, you go, okay, who is this massive nerdy weirdo saying these unfunny things, doing all this very weird behavior? And if you look at his X account, where he posts memes, they're always horrible. They're just normie trash. So why is that guy the same guy who's supporting Donald Trump so ardently and fervently? Well, it's because I think this is where we can come to the understanding of the spiritual, or the lack of spirituality for the Anglo-Viking at the moment when it comes to politics. Once there's no more worlds to conquer, or at least if you've set your ship a sail to all the seven seas and you come back home, then it's a bit of an ennui. So you just have this meaninglessness to it. And he considers himself, I think, libertarian, or some moderate position, a centrist, a radical centrist, or something like this, where he finds it very clever to be able to be nuanced in a way that's not actually taking any position. And he countenances this with just, I think, a lot of his dialogue and rhetoric around, I'm pro, say, social, opening progressive, but I'm anti-fiscal, conservative or progressive, or whatever it is. So when he's trying to triangulate here, is that he's the enlightened centrist in the middle with all the right rational opinions. But very quickly, it's easy to see that that's not the case. He's much more of an empty cup. And this is a bit of perplexing, and this is maybe where the paradox comes in, is because a guy who's very, very clearly clever, smart, and applied himself in ways that some of us couldn't even fathom to do one thing. Say, I couldn't even, well, I could, but some people couldn't fathom just even investing and owning Tesla and making your desideratum, your unique life, your raison d'etre, and your whole existence is channeled just to make Tesla successful. But he does that with 6, 7, 8 companies. That's an incredible amount of, energy and vitality and depth, because how does someone have the ability to do all of those things? It definitely is unique, and it's worth, I think, celebrating, and he deserves the adulation for that. But then on the other hand, and this is to say, how is it that he's so politically naive or ignorant? Well, it's because he was mostly concerned with the environment which caused his success. Is to say, you allow me to, sporadically, like a Viking, have business regulations and compliance, and I'll try to worm into those confines and make sure that I'm getting the best deal I can in that sphere. But I think what's occurred to him is that there's a totality to politics. Everything is political. There is no escape from this. It is just how the social interaction works. You can't ignore politics because you don't like it, because it still affects you. And if you don't want it to affect you in negative ways, then you have to fight it. And that's what he's finally come to see. I think one of his sons trannied down and is now calling himself some ridiculous name and is bemoaning being the son of Elon, even though his own notoriety is built on the premise that he is Elon's son, who's now pretending to be a woman. So the idea here is that I have lost a son, I think is what Elon has said, which allows for him to understand that there's certain cultural positions now which are massively deleterious to the psychic well-being of the youngsters. And him in particular has a ridiculous amount of children now. I think he's got, it says here 12, but I think he actually has more like 13 or 14 now. And what he's doing is basically sending his semen around by mail to women who are lining up to take a $20 million payday and alimony for life. And all they have to do is raise the next generation of Musks. And so this is a very strange and abstract way of becoming Genghis Khan. If you imagine yourself as a warlord in that way, then obviously the conquering of women comes from the despoliation of their tribe and the capturing and then enslavement of them into your harem. But his abstraction away from this is, how do I get to the logical conclusion of why I would want a concubine or a harem? Is that I would want many, many children. So why don't I just skip straight to that? And most of these women are fairly materialist or shallow in that way, and they only care about money, or they just like to have money, and then they don't really need a relationship with him. So how do I manufacture that? Well, it's A plus B equals C here, and it's very easy to understand why that so many women are signing up for this easy life meal ticket. And so you're both getting what they want, right? So no one's being exploited here, but at the same time, it's a very uniquely bizarre abstraction. And I think it is just Faustian in that way. We've used, he specifically, but in general, socially, we've used technology to remove barriers that have been nature's limits on certain things, which is to say that if you are using IVF to become pregnant, whereas, say, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you would have just been sterile or infertile and had 0 children, this is how the marvels of Faustian technology are bearing fruit, pun intended, because you just do get now the idea that we are able to defy nature, defy the gods. We can spit in their face to a degree and say, no, look, we can actually overcome what are limitations of the organic lived being. And in doing so, you still have to pay some price. There is a curse to this. You can't have free lunch, and you can't, as I say, spit in the face of God and expect there to be no retribution. There will be some sort of divine reckoning. And so I think what we're seeing basically is this idea that he's willing to pay that cost, and that's almost a Faustian bargain in itself. How do I get what I want? And it's only costing me money, but actually it's probably costing him more. Like I can genuinely tell you that his soul will start to slowly shrivel and be chipped away the older these kids get and the more they want out of him, because he's just not quite comprehending what being a parent, what being a father actually means. It's one thing to be Genghis Khan, but Genghis Khan was able to lead a tribe in a way that made him the unity. He died obviously probably too early to have many children come of age, but Elon will be old, and he will have these many, many, many dozens of children looking to him for things which he cannot provide because he's not that man. And this is where you're paying that cost to the Faustian bargain. You're propagating yourself, the progeny, in a way that allows you to live forever, but at the same time, what that cost is at the cost of greatness. None of your kids will ever be able to imbue what it takes. That you won't have the legacies of the Hohenzollerns or something like that, because you don't have the epigenetic force, or you could call it the circumstances, to actually provide and start to grow these plants in that productive way. And so he's now trying to let society provide that. how do I influence politics in a way that provides the structures for my kids, for what I see as the future of the race. And this is where we've seen this conflict with Elon, and it becomes even more paradoxical, is that he's very clearly aware of the nature of immigration as a net negative, and the sources, that is the destinations of immigrants, is a very important part of this picture. He knows the calculus. He senses, and it's very intuitive to him, that certain people from certain countries with certain cultural, ethnic backgrounds are worse for society. He knows this. It's not even something I think he tries to hide anymore, but it is something that I think is maybe understated in the way that he operates. And there's two things here. The first thing is he's in an environment where there's very clever people from all backgrounds. So in a way, it causes this sample bias, positive sample bias, where you have a cognitive dissonance saying, I think that every single Indian is net positive, is productive member of society, because every Indian I meet in Silicon Valley is always pushing the envelope in terms of growth and economic productivity. Firstly, I think he's hopefully drifting a little bit away from that economics and GDP go up means good. More money in my bank account means good. I think that's a natural position to take when you are in your youth and you think, if I'm better off and everyone else is earning money, then society's getting better. But at the same time, I think, first of all, I think he does realize that's now no longer the case, and that there is certainly a lot of vociferous pushback on his claim that H-1B visas were a beneficial program set up for the benefit of Americans. It was very clearly not true. But I think the second thing is that he's now understanding that there's only certain things that get done by a certain Western Faustian force, and he sensed it innately. And maybe it's not even something that he recognizes consciously yet, but it is there. It's this slumbering agent whereby he will awaken at some point in time and go, actually, this is why I'm able to achieve these things, is because I embody the soul, this Faustian need for the infinite, the will to power that no other culture is able to possess. You can have a billion Asians or a billion Africans or a billion Arabs, and it will never produce someone like that. There isn't the culmination, the bricolage. You won't have this synergization of the Viking man to the spirit in that way. And so I think he maybe comes to that understanding very quickly, is that someone like Trump is only possible because Trump is Faustian. Now, no one's saying Trump is perfect and he's the encapsulation and the embodiment of exactly what we want out of a Faustian Caesar. I don't think anyone's saying that he's their role model or the perfect avatar of what we want as our first Sulla. But at the same time, why support him? Why would Elon, after being you can see with his crappy cartoon, why would he, a lifelong Democrat / libertarian / centrist, think that he's now a Republican? And I think from his perspective at least, he's gone, no, the left, when I was reasonable, was further to the center. And when we hear left and right in politics, we hear Republican Democrats, which is obviously nonsensical. These are two parties which have basically formed the uni party for a lot of the last 60, 70 years, since at least the 1920s, 1930s, FDR. So what you really are talking about is that everyone agreed with my positions and society wasn't that bad. There wasn't so many things wrong that I needed to take an actual position on most political programs leaning social policies. Now, with my tranny son and a whole bevy of, you could say, alarmist media propaganda, and this comes from both sides of the spectrum here, is to say there's a lot of amplification of certain activities by, say, the American browns. So brown people in America killing each other at untold rates, and the crime levels might actually be lower in a lot of degrees from, say, the previous 10, 20, 30 years ago, somewhere like Chicago or Baltimore. I mean, these are death traps a lot of the time, but only for certain demographics. They're not actually that bad if you're white. I think most white Americans have what is considered a very propitious and you could say, comfortable life. Most of them have far above the median household income and live certainly with the ability to retire by the time they're 60, etc. So for all intents and purposes, you would say white America economically is doing fine. But the problem is that economics does not make a society, or make a society make. And in doing his observations, obviously he's come to this conclusion after this long, laborious journey that society is made up of people, and it's the people that count in terms of providing an atmosphere for where you want to live socially. He saw obviously the deterioration of somewhere like San Francisco, like Silicon Valley. You go from having what is a hub of innovation ideation amongst very smart and particularly engineers, but because politics seeps into the joints and it pollutes the land, you have this effervescent stench now. This, you almost want to call it the bile, has risen out of what is the leftist, we can call this the progressive, the liberal, almost post-liberal leftists, where they've now said, no, there's no stop here from progress, and the progress is my ethical component around subjectivities, to say, I'm going to reduce all of these concepts around particularly patriarchal but Western society and inverse them. I'm now top of the hierarchy. Me as a brown, fat, disabled lesbian is actually the most powerful. And if I can frame the conversation in that way, then it allows me to dominate someone else, because it's obviously, but these are all power structures, which is fine. There's a sensible reason to do that. If I was a fat, brown, retarded lesbian, then I would want to be powerful. Like, everyone has that innate ability about themselves to want to be the important person or whatever it is. But the way we intuit it as humans is that we know it's not true. We sit there and say, actually, you know what, I don't think that I want to listen to any more of these mongrel speeches, because they are just impotent nonsense. And you can see that with a lot of those communist meetings in America and the type of dysgenic and just complete failures that attend those things. So this is the pathway that Elon has trodden politically, and he's come to this point where he's now supporting Donald. But what you're seeing is just his brain, and this is said before, he has a bit of an empty cup here politically in his head, where people have just been pouring consistently propaganda into it. He's very open to this pollution because he's sincere and he's earnest, and that's gotten him very far in business, asking questions and then being open to that. And he's not, say, very agreeable, but he's definitely and conscientious, but he's for sure open, and then having experts or trusted people or friends of yours hold political positions means you probably say, oh yeah, well, I'll agree with that person, because naturally, if you're very smart and clued into this thing that I don't pay much attention to, you must be morally right here. And that's obviously just not the case. But you can also see this with fair weather, I want to say, exploitators of the Trumpist style movement, and that's those tech guys in Silicon Valley, where they've said, oh look, now I'm supporting Trump, and none of them I think is sincere, because they all think they're very, very clever, and they all wish they were personable and charismatic enough to be someone like Trump rather than who they are. Because once you have all the money in the world, it loses a lot of its luster. It buys you the things that you've always wanted, but then you've got those things and now you don't want them anymore. And you can see this with almost all of those Silicon Valley guys, because they stop understanding money as a concept to strive for, and they start saying, what else can I do? And this is something the finance guys learned in the 80s and 90s when they had all the money in the world, the titans of industry, is that once you can buy everything you want, you actually probably want to transform politics instead. And so you start to give to social programs and political movements and support maybe local or even international organizations for these matters. So you have think tanks and all this sort of garbage. And you can see it with George Soros and other hedge funders like Robert Mercer, where they go about their business in as much secrecy as possible, supporting these ventures. Elon, once again, he's very earnest. He doesn't do that. He's not trying to be conniving, diabolical, and running some underhanded schemes around, oh, let me import 1 billion immigrants so that I have the reins of society, because a fractured society is a much more controllable society. which is one thesis I think that I'm not necessarily sure holds true, but it is the thesis of the left to a degree. And so Elon, being Elon, goes, no, actually, let's solve this problem. As we said before with his businesses, he's taken the idea that you have solvable solutions and all you have to do is cram smart people into it, and then you commercialize it yourself with your other smart people group. But politics is obviously social, and it involves many different tiers of society. And this does not include very, very smart people. Sometimes it includes just actually dum-dums, and which is fine, because obviously dum-dums should also be represented. But it does mean that Elon's base principles reasoning becomes it breaks down. You don't have that. What you are left with, though, is a metaphysical feeling, and if you can channel the same metaphysical feeling that the rest of the world, or the rest of the society is able to also tap into, then you get something like a Trump movement, because it go, let's make America great, and everyone who thinks America should be great says yes, and that's 160 million people. And it's not very hard to understand that if you just embrace it and you don't think about it. You turn your brain off to a degree. It's fine. The idea that you should cognitize and calculate and tabulate everything, every single iota of information that's ever been fed to you in any single way is just, no, first of all, it's dishonest intellectually, but it's also impractical. And I think you just sometimes accept that you'll just be ignorant of things, or you'll just be a bit of a kowtowing yes man, or uneducated fool. We're all doing it, so why can't I? But the problem I think that always arises with Elon is the what's next, because he is a man with insatiable, infinite needs, and this goes, as you see before, with his personal life. He's somehow bagged a threesome with Amber Heard and some other hottie, Cara Delevingne. So you think, okay, how is a super strange guy who's not ugly, but obviously, a billionaire, how is he able to do that? Obviously, with his money, his social appeal there is very much pecuniary. But in the more political realm, he's been able to convey a certain amount of both attitude and gratitude. So he had a lot of events that he organized with Trump where he went out to speak. And Elon is not a strong public speaker. So the idea that he's able to imbue a crowd with anything other than some very, I would say, chosen catechisms around support Trump for these reasons, and everyone cheers because that's what you're there for. But when it's a rousing, inspiring speech, if you look at someone who's actually well gifted in speaking, say Enoch Powell or Oswald Mosley, you get the sense that he's actually a very earnest, but say slightly uncouth and very much an amateur. So what is it then that he's able to do? He's able to bring money to the table, but billionaires have always been able to bring money to the political table in America. It's an old known system that one thing is to promise voters something, and another thing is to deliver the promises to the rich men behind the scenes. This is the way politics has been done in America since, say, 1850, even before and after Lincoln. So it's not a new thing here that money buys votes, but it is a new thing that money doesn't buy all the votes anymore. And even with all the money in the world, that you can't actually win elections in America anymore, because there's been an exhaustion, a spiritual exhaustion of Americans for money, in particular how it's channeled into politics. And you'll have a vestige, so you have a legacy effect here. There are a lot of demographics which are just single party voters for reasons. But when you have a polarization of the populace, and you say, look, you actually don't now have to choose between politicians A and B, who are basically the same candidate for the same party. You can actually pick different. You can pick the historical party A, or you can pick Trump. Then you're giving people an actual choice. And now that they can make an actual choice, they go a bit more with their gut feeling rather than the propaganda, rather than the leaning on what is the familiarities of certain social programs, pensions or whatever nonsense. You go, no, I'm going to pick the guy who talks to me, not the guy who's talking to the backers, to the sponsors. And this is definitely different in Trump's second term than it was in his first. And Elon was naive enough to not understand that Trump is actually not in it for Elon. He's using Elon as much as Elon thinks I'm backing a winner. Trump is saying, like, you're going to back me, but I'm not necessarily going to back you. It's to say, I have a vision of America and you fit it 90%, but that 10% you're going to have to bear. You're going to have to suffer through what is a crippling effect of some of your business interests, just because of the way that I do business is going to impact you necessarily. And so Elon has obviously this internal struggle as we speak. It's to say, I want to commit to something wholeheartedly. He's a very earnest person, as I said before, which is Trump. He wants to say, I'm a 100% Trumpist. At the same time, denouncing principles he's held sacred for basically his whole life, which is free market capitalism, or capitalism in general, how we apply the technology to the commercial aspect of a free market. He's something of a traditionalist and a purist in that way, and certainly an apologist for mercantilism. So his inability to be able to separate these two things, so he has a cognitive dissonance around this. It's fine, I don't mind losing a few billion, few hundred billion because I'm doing what's right, is winning in the war in his soul, in this inner spirit. He's going through this Viking nightly torment. It's, do I uphold principles and virtues, being a gallant, noble man, or do I actually just want to be as piratical as possible and earn as much money and dominate in that sphere? And this is where we're seeing that clash in his inner soul. And I think I personally don't think Elon has the inner strength to overcome this. I think it will actually kill him to a large degree. I think over the next 10 years, you'll see what is the complete and utter collapse of the Elon Musk as we know it. And it's one thing to die on a battlefield where you're still remembered positively because your legacy is tied to your death saga. But unfortunately, I think for Elon, he's going to see what is the unfortunate decline in real time as a recorded process on the social media space. It's once you've hit your peak, then unless you maintain that, there's only one direction. And someone who's incapable of dealing with the type of feedback like Trump is able to deal with the negativity very, very well. Whereas Elon lashes out, and you can see this on his platform in social media, that he has an inability to stomach these things. And so his weakness is obviously going to be exploited just by the universe. And this is that Faustian bargain. He's now having to, at some point, pay the price for what is his greatness.